Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good evening, everyone. Okay, today we will take for study the Gopakamoggallāna Sutta, the discourse with somebody named Gopakamoggallāna, and this is Sutta number 108 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And this sutta is interesting because it takes place shortly after the Buddha has passed away. And so it gives us a little bit of a spotlight on how the Sangha managed after its founder and master was no longer in the world. We have a long account of the last days of the Buddha and his passing away in the Digha Nikaya, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. But the Mahaparinibbana Sutta ends with the division of the Buddha's relics amongst the different kings and states in India in the Buddha's time. But this sutta shows us a little bit what was taking place after the Buddha's passing away. And it actually gives us two spotlights on what is happening. One is from a purely historical point of view, what is happening in India during this period. And the other is from a religious point of view, how is the Sangha managing without the guidance and leadership of its founder and master. Okay, so the sutta opens when the Venerable Ananda is living in Ranjgir in the bamboo grove, and it's not long after the Buddha had attained final Nibbana. And on this occasion, the sutta tells us, King Ajatasattu Vaidehi Putta, which means the son of the lady from Videha. King Ajatasattu was the king of the state of Magadha, that is the central Indian state, and now it pretty much coincides with what is called Bihar, the state of Bihar in India. And King Ajatasattu was suspicious of another king, King Pajota, and he was having his capital city of Rajagaha fortified. Okay, why was King Ajatasattu suspicious of King Pajota? To answer this question, we have to know how Ajatasattu came to power, how he became king. King Ajatasattu, or Ajatasattu, was the son of the previous king of the state of Magadha, whose name was Bimbisara, King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara had actually made the Buddha's acquaintance before his enlightenment. We find a sutta it's a sutta in verse in the Sutta Nipata, which tells us how when the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha, had left the state, the Sakyan state, and had entered the state of Magadha in order to practice meditation and austerities, one day when he was going on alms round in the city of Rajagaha, King Bimbisara had spotted him and was very impressed by his aristocratic bearing. And he could tell that this was not an ordinary person, but somebody from a distinguished, even a royal background. And so he had some of his attendants follow the Bodhisattva back to his cave and then informed Bimbisara where he was staying. And so Bimbisara went along with some of his retinue to meet the Bodhisattva and speak with him. And Bimbisara actually was so impressed by the Bodhisattva that he offered to share his kingdom with him, tried to persuade him to give up his ascetic life and become a layperson again, and he offered him half of the state of Magadha. But the Bodhisattva refused the king and told him that I come from the royal background myself, and I've given up all of my privileges in order to seek the way to liberation. And so I don't accept your offer. And then Bimbisara asked the Bodhisattva, he said, when you attain enlightenment, if you attain enlightenment, please come back to see me and to share your realization with myself. And so after the Buddha attained enlightenment, he went back to the state of Magadha, to Rajagaha, and he met King Bimbisara, and he gave a discourse to Bimbisara and to a large number of the retinue of King Bimbisara. And as a result of that discourse, Bimbisara reached the stage of stream entry, Sotapatti, the first stage of enlightenment. And so Bimbisara was always, now as a partly enlightened disciple, he was always very devoted to the Buddha. And next in line for the throne was his eldest son, Ajatasattu. But many years later, now we're coming into maybe the last 10 years of the Buddha's life, perhaps even a shorter period, the Buddha's jealous, envious cousin, Devadatta, wanted to overthrow the Buddha and take control of the Sangha. And he figured that the best way for him to advance his career, so to speak, is to make friends with royalty. But he knew Bimbisara was completely devoted to the Buddha, and he had no chance of striking up a friendship with Bimbisara. But he also must have had some idea that Bimbisara's son was susceptible to influence. And now Devadatta, through his meditation, he never reached any stage of realization, of wisdom, but he had gained psychic powers, supernormal powers. And he knew that ordinary people are impressed by psychic powers. And so he used his psychic powers to come into the presence of Ajatasattu. He showed himself in different shapes. As a young boy, as a naga or dragon. And first he frightened Ajatasattu, but then he resumed his ordinary form of Devadatta. And when Ajatasattu saw how Devadatta could perform these wondrous feats, he thought, this is truly a wise and holy person, somebody who's achieved something through his monastic practices. And so he developed great devotion and confidence in Devadatta. And when Devadatta knew that he had won over Ajatasattu's mind, he told him the idea that was in his own mind. He said, you're starting to get old. You have gray hairs already. and your father is still the king, are you going to go on waiting year after year after year until your father passes away before you become king? By that time, maybe your own son will be grown up already. Why don't you hasten the process and get rid of your father? Then you can become king. I'll get rid of Sakyamuni and I'll become the Buddha. And then we can work wonders together. And so Ajatasattu was taken up with this idea, and he had his father imprisoned. He got some of his own attendants to catch Bimbisara and put him into the prison. Then Devadatta came back to the palace when Ajatasattu took over the throne and said to him, "What have you done with your father?" And he said, "I've overthrown him and I've put him in prison." Then Devadatta said, "It's not enough. You don't know, you can't really trust your father. It could be that some prison wardens will be sympathetic to him and let him out from the prison. Then he'll gather his army and overthrow you and put you in prison." So then Ajata asked Devadatta, "Then what am I supposed to do?" And Devadatta said, "Kill him." And so Ajatasattu put his father to death. And this is committing the crime of parricide, which is one of the most severe karmic actions a person is capable of, according to Buddhism. Okay, now Bimbisara had a close friendship with the king of another state. This is the state of Avanti, which was somewhat to the west and the south of Magadha, in the southwest of Magadha. And the king of the state of Avanti was this King Pajota, who had, his name is sometimes given as King Chanda Pajota. The word Chanda means fierce or wrathful, because this King Pajota had a very quick, very powerful temper. And when he got angry, he would explode with anger. But somehow he had formed an alliance with Bimbisara. And so when he heard that King Ajatasattu had killed his father, Bimbisara, then after some time he decided that he would attack Ajatasattu. At the same time, Ajatasattu, who was the king of the state of Magadha, was trying to expand the territory of his own state. He was building up first a new capital, the old village of Pataligama. He was transforming into a city which he would call Pataliputta. And he was swallowing up several of the tribal republics, the old republics that were surrounding Magadha, and absorbing them into the state of Magadha. So he was building up an empire. And so probably King Pajota was also suspicious and afraid of Ajatasattu and wanted to stop him from expanding, because he thought that if Ajatasattu got too powerful, he would then focus his eyes on the state of Avanti and try to capture Avanti and absorb it into the expanding Magadhan Empire. Okay, so this is some of the background that's taking place behind the scenes of the sutta. Okay, and so one day the Venerable Ananda was about to go into Rajagaha on his alms round, but he might have been walking rather fast, and so he reached the city too early, and he thought it's too early to go for alms in Rajagaha. Let me go to the workplace of the Brahmin Gopakamoggallāna. I don't know why he had this thought, because Gopakamoggallāna doesn't really figure anyplace else within the suttas. So it's not like he was a long-term follower of the Buddha. Perhaps his workplace was close to the city of Rajagaha. So anyway, Venerable Ananda goes to the Brahmin Gopakamoggallāna at his workplace. And the Brahmin Gopakamoggallāna welcomes Ananda, offers him a seat, and then he's going to ask him a question. So when Ananda gets seated, this Gopakamoggallāna asks him whether there is any single bhikkhu, any single monk, who possesses in each and every way all those qualities that were possessed by Master Gotama. And so this raises the question whether the Buddha himself was unique, or whether there were other monks who might have had all of the same qualities as the Buddha. And so Ananda answers, there is no single bhikkhu who possesses in each and every way all those qualities that were possessed by the Bhagava, by the Lord, the Blessed One, who is accomplished, an arhat, and fully enlightened, Sama Sambuddho. Then Ananda introduces what you might call the critical distinction between the Buddha and the enlightened monks. He says, the Blessed One was the arouser of the unarisen path. He is the producer of the unproduced path, the declarer of the undeclared path. In other words, the Buddha is the one who has brought the path to liberation into being. He's the one who found the path and formulated it, proclaimed it, made it available to the world. And so he was the knower of the path, the finder of the path, the one skilled in the path, the one who knows all the different aspects, branches, ramifications of the path. But his disciples now abide following that path and become possessed of it afterwards. In other words, they reach the fruit of the path, the goal of the path, by following this path that was discovered and made known by the Buddha. And it seems here, if we just take this passage at face value, that there's almost no distinction between the Buddha and the enlightened disciples, the arhats, except that the Buddha is the one who discovers the path and makes it known, and that the disciples follow the path and then achieve final liberation under the guidance of the Buddha, or by practicing the path made known by the Buddha. So if we just stay with this statement, there seems to be no justification for elevating the Buddha above the enlightened disciples, the arhats, except insofar as he was the first one. However, there are other suttas. There are other suttas which indicate that the Buddha possessed qualities that even the enlightened arhats did not possess. These include amongst the 10 Tathagata powers, 10 Tathagata balas, mentioned in Sutta number 12. Quite a number of those powers are not possessed by other disciples. Or if they're possessed, only in a much more limited way than the Buddha possesses them. Especially qualities like being able to know the maturity of the faculties of others, being able to know the underlying tendencies, the potentials of others, being able to know all of the different elements and constituents of the world, being able to know in extensive detail the past lives of others, being able to judge from a person's conduct where they would be reborn if they were to die at that moment. And then also the Buddha possesses what are called here it's translated the 4 kinds of intrepidity, or 4 kinds of self-confidence. And of these, we could say that a disciple of the Buddha might have the second one, which is the ability to claim that all of the taints or defilements are destroyed. But an ordinary arahant would not have the ability to say that, or to claim that he has become fully enlightened about all dharmas, all phenomena. And also the 3rd and 4th grounds of self-confidence also seem to be unique to the Buddha. In other suttas mention various other special powers and faculties of the Buddha that are not shared by other disciples. And so probably Ananda is mentioning here only the distinction of the Buddha being the forerunner or discoverer of the path, because Gopakamoggallāna is not a disciple or follower of the Buddha, and so he probably doesn't want to extol and praise the Buddha too much, otherwise it might strain the credulity of Gopakamoggallāna. Okay, now, just when they started this conversation, somebody, a Brahmin by the name of Vasakkara, arrives on the scene. And who is this Vasakkara? He is the chief minister of the state of Magadha. That is, in relation to King Ajatasattu, he is like the prime minister. Or maybe in terms of American government, maybe he's like the national security advisor or secretary of state. And he's going around supervising the work at Rajagaha. Probably the work that's taking place here is the construction of military equipment and fortifications to safeguard the city of Rajagaha. Okay, so Vasakkara arrives on the scene, and he goes up to Venerable Ananda and to Gopakamoggallāna, greets them, and then he must have caught some words of their conversation, and so he asked what discussion they were engaged in when he arrived. And then Ananda repeats the conversation. Okay, now Vasakkara presents Venerable Ananda with an important question. He says, is there any single monk who the Buddha had appointed as the leader of the Sangha, so that after he passes away, he could say that after I've passed away, you should regard this monk as the leader of the Sangha. This is my personal successor, my Dharma successor. But when the Buddha was getting ill before he passed away, Ananda had asked him to appoint somebody to be his successor after he passes away. Since Ananda thought if the Buddha is going to pass away, we need somebody to be our leader, our guide, in place of the Buddha. But the Buddha said, do not look to any external refuge. Be a refuge unto yourself be an island unto yourself. Don't take any other external refuge, but take the teaching itself as your refuge, the teaching itself, the Dhamma, as your light, as your guide, as your island, and follow the Dhamma. Let the Dhamma guide yourself individually, and let the Dhamma guide the Sangha. And then again, even when the Buddha was on his deathbed, addressing the whole community of monks, he said, when I pass away, don't think that now we are orphans, now we don't have any teacher, but let the Dhamma which I've taught, and let the Vinaya, the discipline which I've promulgated, let that will be your teacher after I have passed away. So you shouldn't think after I pass away we don't have a teacher anymore, because the Dhamma will still be here, the Vinaya, the code of discipline will still be there. That will be your teacher. Okay, so Ananda then says that the Buddha didn't appoint any single monk to be the leader of the Sangha after he passes away. But then Vasakkara wonders, is there any single monk that maybe the Sangha itself has gotten together and selected one single monk to be the leader of the whole Sangha? And so he asks Ananda whether that is the case. And Ananda says there is no single monk that we've all gotten together and selected one single monk to be the leader of our Sangha. It's somewhat curious that Vasakkara is asking questions like this. Maybe because the state of Magadha has been under the control of this tyrannical king Ajatasattu. So maybe Vasakkara's mindset is such that he thinks any organization must have a single leader, otherwise it will collapse. Okay, so then Vasakkara says, if you have no refuge, what is the basis for your unity? How is it that you're able to live together harmoniously in a community? And Vasakkara is continually using this word refuge, which it's not the word sarana, but it's a derivative of the word sarana. It's pati sarana. It's close to the word refuge. It has sarana as part of it. But pati gives a sense of something that one is connected to, that one falls back upon. Actually, the meaning is quite similar to sarana, to refuge. Okay, so the Brahmin is in a sense drawn an incorrect inference. He thinks that since there's no single monk who has been appointed as the head of the Sangha, therefore the Sangha has no patisarana, no refuge. But Ananda corrects him and says, it's not the case that we are without a refuge. In fact, we have a refuge. In Pali it says, na ko mayang brahmana apatisarana. Apatisarana is the negation of patisarana, without a refuge. And he says, sapatisarana mayang brahmana dhamma patisarana, which means we are with a refuge, or we have a refuge. And that is, we have the Dhamma as our refuge. Then Vasakkara is puzzled by this, and then, in a rather roundabout way, he asks Ananda to explain the meaning of this. And Ananda explains in a rather particular way, I have to say, because in the Parinibbana Sutta, where the Buddha tells the monks how to dwell, having yourselves as a refuge, the Dhamma as a refuge, he explains it in terms of practicing the 4 Satipatthanas. That when I'm gone, you have the Dhamma as a refuge. What does this mean? You should dwell contemplating the body in the body, feelings in feelings, mind in mind, and mental phenomena in mental phenomena. But Ananda explains the meaning of the statement in a rather more specific and limited way in terms of the Patimokkha, the code of training rules. So he says that the Blessed One, the Buddha who knows and sees, has laid down, prescribed the course of training for bhikkhus. That is, he's laid down the Patimokkha. Then Ananda explains how on the Uposatha day, this would be on the full moon day and the dark moon day, all of us who are living in dependence upon a single village district meet together in unison. That is, the monks might be spread out over a certain region in the vicinity of a village, and even though they might be spread out in different groves, some may be living in the village, some living out in the countryside, in caves, in forests, but in that area, all centered upon a particular village, they're all considered to be living together in the same very broad area. And so all of them get together and meet together, and then one of them who knows the code of monastic rules by memory recites it. And then if a monk, when the Patimokkha is being recited, if there's a monk who remembers committing any transgression, then he will confess it, and then we, that is the Sangha, will deal with him according to the proper way laid down in the code of discipline. Okay, so in this way, the code of monastic rules becomes the framework for holding the Sangha together. And in Venerable Ananda's explanation, that is the Dhamma that the Sangha looks to for a refuge. Okay, so now Vasakkara asks another question. This is a more appropriate question. He asks whether there is any single monk that you now honor, respect, revere, and venerate, and on whom you live in dependence. So this is not somebody who's the head of the Sangha, who's like we call the Sangha Raja, the king of the Sangha. But he's asking whether there are any elder monks that one looks to for guidance. And then Ananda says, there is a single monk. This actually means at least one, but maybe more, whom we now honor, respect, revere, and venerate. Sometimes it's thought that after the Buddha passed away, Mahakassapa became the head of the Sangha. But that is actually not really the case. Mahakassapa didn't become the chief of the Sangha, but he just became maybe you call this the president of the first Buddhist council that was held. It didn't mean that he was the first patriarch of the Buddha Sangha. But he only fulfilled that function just for the duration of the first council. After that, he didn't retain the status of being president or leader of the whole Sangha. But there must have been at the time a number of elder monks who possessed all of these qualities that are to be enumerated by Ananda. So Ananda mentions 10 qualities He calls these 10 qualities inspiring confidence that have been declared by the Buddha. And when we see these qualities in any of the monks, then we respect and honor them, and we look to them for guidance. So what are these 10 qualities? They're all quite familiar to us. One is that the monk is virtuous, and he lives in accordance with the rules of discipline. The second is that he is learned, somebody who has heard many teachings and who knows many teachings, bears them in mind. The third is that he is content with the simple requisites. These are the 4 requisites: robes, alms food, a dwelling place, and medicines. The fourth is that he can attain the 4 jhanas. These are the stages of samadhi. The fifth is that he can exercise the different kinds of psychic power. So we see that even though the Buddha didn't place great emphasis on the psychic powers, but tried to tantalize people to become meditators in order to gain psychic powers, but still possession of these psychic powers was considered an important quality in a monk. But my own suspicion is that it didn't really have such a high prestige, so that those monks who possessed all the other qualities without having psychic powers would still have been respected and honored. For example, Venerable Sariputta, so far as we can tell, we never see him exercising supernormal powers. He never claims to possess the supernormal powers. But still, all of the monks looked to him for guidance and had great respect for him. Okay, sixth, with the divine ear element, he can hear sounds far distance, hear the sounds in other world systems. Seventh is that he's able to read the minds of others, to understand the minds of others. And eighth is that he recollects his previous lives, even over many aeons. Seventh is that he has the divine eye with which he can see how beings pass away and take rebirth. That's the ninth. And then the 10th, and the most important, is that he has attained liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom through the destruction of the defilements, the taints. Of these last 6 qualities that are mentioned, from 5 to 10, the most important is number 10. So even a monk who doesn't have the 5 mundane abhinyas would still be highly regarded. I believe, so far as I know, one doesn't see any mention in the suttas of Sariputta even claiming to have the recollection of past lives of the divine eye. He has mastery over all the stages of samadhi, so if he wanted these powers, he would be able to get them easily. But in his verses in the Theravada, he says that he had no interest in the 5 abhinyas, I believe. He says, my mind did not incline towards the 5 abhinyas, but he went straight for the knowledge of liberation. But the commentaries are not quite easy with drawing the conclusion that Sariputta didn't have the supernormal powers. So it says, the commentaries say, even though Sariputta didn't have any interest in them, or his mind didn't incline to them, but when he achieved arahatship, all of those powers automatically came into his possession. Just like, I think it uses the example of a son of the king who might not have any interest in the treasures in the royal treasury. But when his father dies and he gets appointed king, all of those treasures automatically come into his possession. But despite what the commentary says, to my knowledge, there's no sutta which shows Sariputta exercising consciously these supernormal powers. Anyway, so Ananda says these are the 10 qualities inspiring confidence declared by the Buddha. And when we find these 10 qualities in any of the monks, then we honor, respect, and venerate him, and we live in dependence on him, looking to him for guidance. Okay, then in paragraph 25, Vasikara, the Brahmin Vasikara, asked Ananda, where is Master Ananda living now? The commentary says that Vasikara, Brahmin Vasikara, knew damn well where Venerable Ananda was living. But it was his job to set up protection for the bamboo grove. And he was a somewhat vain person, and he wanted to be praised. And so he asked Venerable Ananda where he's living in order to open the subject of conversation that would feed back and gain him some praise from Ananda. So Ananda says, I'm living in the bamboo grove. Then Vasikara says, I hope that the bamboo grove is pleasant, quiet, undisturbed, favorable for retreat, for meditation. And then Ananda, seems a little bit like too much flattery on Ananda's part, but he says, indeed, Brahmin, the bamboo grove is pleasant and so on. This is because of such guardian protectors as yourself. But Vasikara shows a kind of false modesty, while he's puffing himself up and thinking, yes, it's truly because of myself that these monks are able to live quite peacefully in the bamboo grove. But then he wants to flatter Ananda a little bit, so he says, indeed, Master Ananda, that the bamboo grove is pleasant, favorable for retreat and so on. That's because of the worthy ones who are meditators and cultivate meditation. Then he recounts some conversation or discussion that he had earlier with the Buddha. He says, one time when the Buddha was living in Vaisali, I went there and I had a discussion with him about meditation. And then he says, Master Gotama was a meditator and cultivated meditation, and he praised every type of meditation. And here the Pali word uses the word here, jhana. Sabbang chapanaso bhavang gotamo jhanang vane siti. That he praised all types of jhana. And usually the word jhana is used in the Buddha's texts to mean higher states of meditation, which are all considered desirable. But the word jhana is derived from the verb jayati, which can mean to meditate the way we think of meditation, sitting with the eyes closed, focusing upon some object that will purify the mind. But it could also mean simply thinking intently upon a particular object. And so Ananda, for some reason, there seems to be some subtext here that I don't quite understand, doesn't go along with Vasikara. But he says, the Buddha didn't praise every type of meditation, nor did he condemn every type of meditation. Maybe he's saying this because he wants to give Vasikara a little instruction about what real meditation involves. So he says, the Buddha did not praise every type of meditation, nor did he criticize every type of meditation. Okay, what kind of meditation did the Buddha not praise? Then he says, here somebody dwells with a mind obsessed by sensual lust. This is kama raga. He dwells with a mind obsessed by sensual lust, and he does not understand as it really is the escape from arisen sensual lust. Okay, so his mind is overcome by lust, and making his sensual lust, I'm translating quite literally, making the sensual lust the inner object, he meditates. Then there come a series of verbs based on the verb jayati. In Pali it comes out jayati, pajayati, nijayati, upajayati. So somewhat hard to translate. So he's harboring sensual lust within, and then he meditates, premeditates, out-meditates, and mismeditates. That's a kind of attempt to translate the series of words in Pali. Similarly, he dwells with his mind obsessed by anger or ill will, the mind obsessed by sloth and torpor, the mind obsessed by restlessness and remorse, or with the mind obsessed by doubt. So what Ananda is mentioning here are the 5 mental hindrances. Usually we think of jhana, real meditation, beginning when one overcomes the 5 hindrances. But here Ananda is speaking as though one could meditate with the 5 hindrances in the mind. And that type of meditation the Buddha did not praise. And then he says, what is the kind of meditation that the Buddha did praise? And then he mentions the 4 jhanas. Okay, so then Vasakkara draws the conclusion that the Buddha criticized the kind of meditation that should be criticized, and he praised the kind of meditation that should be praised. And after saying that, then Vasakkara takes his leave. Of course, he's a busy man. He's inspecting the fortifications. Okay, then after Vasakkara leaves, the Brahmin, Gopakamoggallāna, he gives his name to the sutta, though he only plays a minor role in it, says to Venerable Ananda, you still haven't answered the question that I asked you. It seems somewhat puzzling that he should say that, because Ananda did answer the question already. But the commentary gives an explanation for this. I don't know how the commentary gets this information, by the way. Maybe it's speculating as well. But it says that the Brahmin Gopakamoggallāna was envious of Vasakkara. And he was envious because he was thinking that Ananda is devoting so much time to this discussion with Vasakkara. Here Ananda came to my workshop. He opened this discussion with me before going an alms round, and here Vasakkara came along. I had this opportunity for an extended discussion with Ananda. This is my explanation, not the commentary. I'm elaborating in my own way. I had this opportunity for an extended discussion with Ananda. Once in a blue moon I get that opportunity, and then this Vasakkara barges in uninvited and monopolizes the whole discussion. And now the sun has risen and people have their food ready. It's just about time for Ananda to leave, and I didn't get to hold this discussion with him. The commentary just says that he was envious of Vasikara because Ananda gave a lot of time to Vasikara. So Gopakamoggallāna repeats the question, or he says, Master Ananda has not yet answered the question that I asked him. And then Ananda said, didn't I already answer it? And then he just repeats the answer that he already gave him. And that's the end of the sutta. Okay, if there's any questions, then please feel free to ask. Yeah.
What do the terms mean? Meditates, premeditates, not meditates, mismeditates?
Yeah, they're words that don't really have such a clear, distinct meaning, but they occur in some contexts where somebody is almost making fun of a meditator. Another place where they occur in the same series occurs in the Majjhima Nikaya. I think it's sutta number 50. Yeah, okay, this is a place where Mara is trying to get some Brahmins to ridicule the monks. And so Mara is the evil one. He takes possession of the Brahmin householders and getting control of their minds, he makes them abuse and revile and ridicule the monks. So he says, these bald-pated recluses, these swarthy, menial offspring of Brahma's feet, claim, we are meditators, we are meditators. And then the Brahmins say, and with shoulders drooping, with their heads down and all limp, they sit there, sort of like somebody drowsing off while meditating. He uses that same series of terms. They meditate, premeditate, out-meditate, and mismeditate. Then he uses the example, just as an owl on a branch waiting for a mouse meditates, premeditates, out-meditates, and mismeditates, or a jackal on the riverbank waiting for fish, or a cat waiting for a mouse to come out of the hole, meditates, premeditates, out-meditates, and mismeditates. So in the same way, these monks meditate, premeditate, out-meditate, mismeditate. So the words don't really have any specific meaning, but the whole series is like a way of ridiculing those who are practicing meditation. Yeah, George.
In Buddhism, it suggests there's no hierarchy in terms of how the Sangha is managed.
Well,
maybe how has it evolved?
Yeah. The procedure, this is an interesting question, the procedure that Ananda describes here seems to have functioned effectively within the Sangha maybe for a few generations. But over time, what eventually happened is that not the whole Sangha, but each community of monks would eventually wind up with one monk over them who would be pretty much the leader, guide, refuge of that group of monks. The way it evolved, I think, was because, well, first, what the Buddha pretty much envisaged with his instruction is a group of mature monks, already fairly well established, living together in a community. Maybe they'll have younger monks taking ordination and living under them, but one has a group of elder monks living together. But what eventually happened over several generations is it reached a point where elder monks would then attract youngsters to themselves, and they would ordain the youngsters, and the monastery, the community, comes under their guidance. And so within any community, one has one senior monk who is the acharya, the teacher, and the other monks who are under him, who are his ordained pupils, and then they look to him for leadership and for guidance. Though what's true is that the Sangha as a whole is still guided by the Dhamma and the Vinaya. It's not the case that elder monks have the ability to change the Dhamma. So eventually different interpretations started to evolve over time. And so different teachers have their own style of teaching, which is somewhat quite peculiar to themselves. But still, in principle, all would look to the Dhamma and the Vinaya for guidance. Okay, then as Buddhism became well established in different Buddhist countries, during periods when monarchy was the dominant form of political leadership, political administration, it sometimes happened if it was a Buddhist country with a Buddhist king, the feeling developed that the administration of the Sangha should parallel the administration of the country. And so the whole Sangha should be united within one overarching administrative structure, and then one especially prominent, respected monk should be the chief monk governing the whole administration of the Sangha in that country. And this becomes then what's called the Sangha Raja, the king of the Sangha. And we have this even today in Thailand, Laos, maybe Cambodia, I'm not sure. Not in Sri Lanka, because in Sri Lanka the monastic order is divided into 4 different schools or sects. Each one has its own administrative chief who's called the Mahanayaka, the chief leading elder. Burma, I think, has a council of Mahanayaka but not one Sangha Raja. But Thailand has its Sangha Raja. Laos, I think, a Sangha Raja. Even Tibet doesn't quite have a Sangha Raja, but this is an interesting point that the Dalai Lama, though he's regarded as the spiritual and temporal head of Tibetan Buddhism, but in the affairs of the Sangha, the Dalai Lama does not have overriding authority. Like this past July, when I went to this conference in Hamburg, this was the conference to discuss an introduction of the Bhikkhuni Sangha into Tibetan Buddhism, which has never had a Bhikkhuni Sangha. Many of the Western nuns expected the Dalai Lama to come out at the end of the conference and make an announcement. Now I'm going to introduce a Bhikkhuni Sangha into Tibetan Buddhism. But we had a panel discussion at the end of the conference, and then when the Dalai Lama's turn to speak came, he said, even though I'm the Dalai Lama, but I'm not the head of the Tibetan Buddhist Sangha. I don't have the authority to make decisions like this on my own. He says, I myself, I support the introduction of a Bhikkhuni Sangha into Tibetan Buddhism, but this has to be a Sangha decision. It's not a decision that I can make on my own as an individual. And so then the Dalai Lama decided that he wanted to have it this winter, but others said there was not enough time. So next winter to have a conference bringing together many elder monks from different Buddhist traditions, including many Tibetan monks, to discuss this whole issue of the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So it wouldn't be his decision, but then a Sangha decision. Any further questions? Okay, then we come to the end of this class. And this is the end of the whole syllabus that I prepared, 4 years ago? It doesn't mean that we can't discuss more Majjhima Nikaya suttas, but that's like the end of the official course. The others will be like supplementary suttas, additional suttas. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits. We share the merits with the Devas, the Nagas, the Bhutas or fair spirits, asking them to rejoice in these merits and to bring peace and happiness to the world. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Etavata Cha Amhehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Cha Ammehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhutta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Cha Amhehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Sattha Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Avici Hetato Etantare Satakai Upapana Rupya Rupicha Asanya Sannino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibudding Ding 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 Ding